Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing a really deep dive into the ideology of Hindu nationalism, and we're going to use Prabhat Dixit's academic work as our map. We'll trace its origins, we'll break down the core ideas of its key thinkers, and really get a handle on how it evolved. If you're studying political theory or law, this kind of breakdown is going to give you those precise distinctions and that historical context that you absolutely need.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start in the colonial era to really understand the soil where these ideas first took root. Then, we'll get into the foundational ideologies of V.D. Savarkar's Hindutva and M.S. Golwalkar's cultural project. After that, we'll put them right next to each other for direct comparison before we track their legacy and evolution after India's independence. Okay, let's get into it.
All right, to properly get our heads around Hindu nationalism, we have to start in its crucible, the political and social cauldron of late 19th and early 20th century British India. This ideology didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was a direct reaction to a very, very specific set of historical circumstances.
Now, according to Dix's analysis, the fundamental issue was this deep contradiction. On one hand, you had a rising Indian professional class that wanted equal rights, equal opportunities, a level playing field. But on the other hand, for the British Empire to maintain control, they just couldn't grant those demands. To give political and economic equality would have meant dismantling their own colonial power. So this deadlock, this impossible situation, created the perfect fertile ground for new and much more confrontational political ideas to grow. The analysis actually points to specific British policies that were like sparks to kindling for communal division. Take the 1905 partition of Bengal. That was seen as a direct hit on the economic and political clout of the Bengali Hindu elite. Then, in Punjab, the Land Alienation Act of 1907 created huge economic anxiety for Hindu commercial castes by saying they couldn't own land. And then, the big one, the Morley-Minto reforms of 1909. This basically hardwired religious division right into the political system by creating separate electorates. It made your communal identity a political fact. So, what we're seeing in the source is a textbook divide-and-rule strategy. The British supported the old, feudal, conservative groups to act as a brake on the nationalists. They strategically granted favors to the Muslim community to build a political counterweight to the Indian National Congress, which was mostly Hindu at the time. And in doing all this, they deliberately pushed away the educated middle classes, the very people driving the nationalist movement, and they actively nurtured an atmosphere of rivalry and tension between communities. Okay, so it's in this really charged environment that our first major thinker, V.D. Savarkar, comes onto the scene. And his response isn't just about protest, no. He creates a whole new, formal, political theory designed to solidify a Hindu identity against all these pressures. And this, right here, is the absolute core of Savarkar's entire philosophy. He makes a really critical distinction between Hinduism, the religion, and Hindutva. For him, Hindutva isn't about faith or theology. It is a political idea. It's about defining a national, almost racial identity that's rooted in a shared land, the motherland, and a common bloodline. This was a really radical attempt to turn a religious group into a modern political nation. So this slide lays out his 3 non-negotiable criteria for who belongs to this nation. First, Rashtra, or motherland. You have to see India from the Indus River to the seas as your ancestral home. Second, Jati, or common blood. You have to share in the racial lineage of the Hindu people. And the third one is the real kicker, Sanskriti, which includes accepting India as your punyabu, your holy land. Now, that third point is the ideological gatekeeper, because by that definition, Indian Muslims and Christians, whose holy lands are in the Middle East, were automatically excluded from the nation because their ultimate loyalties were seen as divided. So his view on minorities was all about what you might call asymmetrical rights. As this quote shows, he was willing to guarantee protection from minority culture and religion. But, and this is a big but, it was conditional. It required minorities to accept the political and cultural dominance of the Hindu majority. In his eyes, the majority's rights had to be protected from what he saw as potential aggression from minorities, which set up a very clear hierarchy in the state he envisioned. This pragmatic streak really defined his political strategy. Savarkar called for responsive cooperation with the British. Now, this wasn't him endorsing colonial rule, not at all. It was a very calculated, realpolitik move. He figured that by cooperating, Hindus could get a seat at the table, get into the administration, secure jobs and political power that could then be used to defend Hindu interests, especially where they were outnumbered.
And then 1947 happens. Everything changes. The British leave, the trauma of partition, all of it makes Savarkar's political math basically useless. This new post-colonial world needed a new playbook, and M.S. Goldwalker is the one who steps in to write it, completely changing the direction of Hindu nationalism. This slide just nails the fundamental pivot. Savarkar's main goal was political: capture the state, create a Hindu Raj. Goldwalker, on the other hand, made a massive strategic shift. He took the focus off the state and put it squarely on society. His goal wasn't a political takeover, it was a long, slow cultural transformation, what he called the Indianization of the entire nation, right from the grassroots up. Now, in this new reality of an officially secular Indian state, Goldwalker's stance on minorities became way more rigid than Savarkar's ever was. This quote lays out a pretty stark choice. Minorities either have to completely assimilate, adopt Hindu culture, Hindu language, the whole package, or they can stay, but in a state of total subordination, with no special protections, maybe not even basic citizenship rights. There's just no room for conditional partnership anymore. Indianization was his master plan. He saw it as this project of cultural purification that was needed to heal a nation that he thought had been weakened by foreign ideas. This meant saying no to what he called Western isms, socialism, communism, even secular democracy. The idea was to get back to what he defined as the pure, timeless, organic values of ancient Hindu culture. He believed that was the only real foundation for a strong and unified nation. And his tool for this cultural project wasn't a political party, it was the RSS. He saw it as this highly organized, incredibly disciplined cultural cadre. The main job of the RSS was to shape the character of each individual, to create the perfect Swayamsevak. These ideal individuals would then go out into all parts of society and work to change it from the inside. He famously said this would let the organization guide the nation by remote control, influencing everything without ever having to actually hold political office. Okay, so let's put these two ideologies right next to each other. For anyone studying this subject, understanding exactly where Savarkar and Goldwalker differ is, well, it's absolutely essential to see how Hindu nationalist thought changed from within. This table just lays it all out so clearly. You can see how one idea flows directly from the other. Savarkar's political concept of Hindutva meant he was always focused on the state. That focus, in turn, allowed for a more pragmatic view of minorities as possible political partners. So his method was political consolidation. But for Goldwalker, his cultural project of Indianization meant his battleground was society itself. This cultural focus required total assimilation from minorities, not some partnership. And so his method wasn't politics, but that long-term social reshaping carried out by the RSS. So the big question is, which of these two visions ended up being more successful? Which one actually lasted? Let's take a look at the legacy of these competing ideas in post-independence India. Dixit's analysis argues that Savarkar's purely political ideology just didn't hold up in the long run. Its singular focus on protecting Hindu interests from minorities was, well, too one-dimensional. It just didn't connect with the messy, complicated, day-to-day realities of the Hindu population, which was split by caste, class, language, and region. His political theory just didn't resonate with their more immediate concerns. But in stark contrast, Goldwalker's cultural ideology turned out to be far more resilient, far more adaptable to the new reality of an independent, democratic India. See, by separating his project from the immediate goal of capturing the state, his framework could survive and grow inside civil society no matter which political party was in power. So the source concludes that Goldwalker's real genius was in building this robust, self-sustaining ideological system. He adapted to the new reality of a secular state. He cleverly blended ideas from thinkers like Vivekananda and Aurobindo with Savarkar's political core, and he perfected the organizational model of the Swayamsevak to carry out his vision. What he created was this enduring framework that was always committed to social conservatism and a confrontational stance towards minorities. And so, this leads to the source's key argument, that despite all its complex intellectual history and that big strategic shift from the political to the cultural, the ideology's actual application over the years became much, much narrower. In practice, it got boiled down to what the author calls a one-point program, just asserting the superior claims of the Hindu majority over and against minority communities. This detailed look, drawn straight from academic analysis, gives us a really critical framework for understanding an incredibly influential and complex ideology. And it leaves us with one final, big question to think about. What does this evolution, this journey from a broad political theory to a much more focused social agenda, tell us about the deep-seated tensions and the enormous challenges of trying to build a single, unified national identity out of a profoundly diverse society?
Thank you for joining this deep dive with The Explainer. We really hope this structured analysis of the source material gives you a clear and nuanced understanding of the key thinkers, the core concepts, and the historical evolution of Hindu nationalism, and hopefully gives you a really solid foundation for your studies.